Hello and welcome to another episode of our In Conversation With series. I'm Michael Curzon, editor of Bournebrook Magazine, and I'm joined again today by Ben Harris-Quinney of the Bow Group. And the reason Ben has decided to join us again is to discuss the very present and very important issue of the coronavirus. And I thought it'd be important to start by asking Ben why it is that the Bow Group, which is Britain's oldest conservative think tank, has decided at this time to dedicate all its resources to discussing the coronavirus pandemic.
The reason I wanted to do this really is that the Bow Group has access via our health policy fellow, Dr. Stanley, and via the network of Raheem and Steve Bannon in the US into Johns Hopkins Medical School, as well as our links to a variety of governments, to a lot of information on this issue. Obviously, there's a lot of disinformation and confusion going around.
Absolutely.
We've put out what we have, and a lot of people have been quite critical of that because, they want to defend what Boris is doing. So I just thought it would be good to drill down a bit into it all and explain the perspective that we are putting across.
Absolutely.
And also what people should expect.
It seems strange. It's really unprecedented times, really, where such a virus which is spreading as quickly as this and doing the damage which this is doing is also here at the same time as social media, which I think is probably a first, especially on this scale, which sort of leads, as you say, to a spread of disinformation and can water down the messages which should be spreading. So I noticed that, as you said, the Bow Group has been focusing all its efforts recently on trying to spread the correct information. So it'd be interesting to hear.
Well, yeah, it's what we feel is the correct information, but it's backed up by science and experts.
Yes.
So there is conflicting information. There is conflicting data. There are experts who disagree. I see the social media side of things as a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, yes, you've got a lot of people who perhaps don't have access to good information that are making assumptions. But where I think it's a good thing is you have a situation where the government is not giving people particularly good information. So there's a lot of confusion among the general public. And what social media does is it offers a shortcut to the mainstream media to warn people of like things like the coming lockdown. It enables them to make their own decisions on the basis of information. I mean, I think we've moved past the age of deference where the government said, we've got this secret report that tells us that herd immunity is the way to go. I think they need to be publishing the information they have and explaining to the public why they are making the decisions they are making.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to do, really, to put the data out there. Obviously, it's from our perspective what we think, and we're perfectly happy to hear opposing views. But I think it's good that we can get that information out to the public and out to our followers, and use the platform that we have to reach people in that way, and give people provide information that is useful to them and perhaps can also push the government in a certain direction where we think that they are going wrong.
Yes, and where do you think the government particularly is going? What are the main errors the government are making in their response?
Well, I think in the first instance, from what we have seen of the way that this virus has developed in other countries that are further down the line than we are, is that locking down early and quarantining early and shutting the borders early works.
Yes.
The problem with the UK government position is they've said initially that we're pursuing this herd immunity strategy, so we're letting the virus spread we're slowing it down, but we're letting it spread. They've then said they've abandoned that strategy, and their objective is now to slow it down as fast as they can. But if that was the case, they should have locked the country down immediately. They should have closed the border immediately. They should have closed the schools immediately. They didn't do that. And I think a lot of people don't realise when we say immediately, in this situation, seconds count. So the fact that the government ends up doing that 3 days later, most people might think, well, yeah, what's the problem? They did it eventually. But the 3 days that the virus had to exponentially spread will mean that thousands more people are infected and thousands more people may die. So I think the government has been slow. It's not learned the lessons of other countries like Italy, like South Korea, like China, like Israel.
Yeah.
And my suspicion is, or the only rational explanation I can find as to why they are not doing that is because they are actually still pursuing this herd immunity strategy. So I want to explain why I think that strategy is so wrong.
Please do, yes.
Firstly, I think there's a real moral problem with it, because even if the science behind the strategy is correct, what it essentially means is sacrificing the older generation for the young.
Yes.
And the assumption is that the lives of the young are more valuable than the lives of the old. Now, that's not something that I personally believe. I think a lot of people have a moral issue with that. My belief is that there is sanctity to all life, whether someone is 99 years old or 10 years old. And I think that we get into very, very dangerous moral territory if we start talking about people that are more deserving of medical care than others, other than based on purely medical evaluations. The way the NHS has always worked is on a first come, first serve basis, not on a this person is more deserving of care basis. And I think that as I say, there's a real moral hazard around that. But just looking at the science, the assumption that the UK government made was that this virus was similar to other viruses that they were looking at. Now, all evidence points to the fact that this is a novel virus, and so you cannot make the assumptions of other viruses about this virus. The other issue with it is that the assumption is that the virus decreases in severity the more times you have it. So you develop antibodies theoretically, and then you become more and more immune to the virus. That is true for a lot of viruses, but there are also a lot of viruses where it isn't true.
Yes.
And if you look at something like dengue fever, the mortality actually increases very significantly for dengue fever the more times you get it.
Right. Okay.
Equally, we can see things like the flu, where you can have it multiple times, in part due to the fact that there are different strains developing, but that's likely to also be the case with this virus. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that there were already multiple strains of it. So I think all of those assumptions on the science were false. As I say, we're in touch with people at Johns Hopkins. They're saying that they really wouldn't. It may be true, but they have no information that suggests that thesis is true, and there's no other country that has information that suggests that thesis is true. So I think if the government do have this special scientific data that backs up what they're doing, they need to publish it, and they need to share it with other countries as well.
Yes, for the good of them as well. Yeah.
Indeed, because I think what they've done is they've developed a situation where I think most people accept this is a global crisis and it's going to be terrible for every country. But most countries have taken a similar approach. They've seen the virus spreading, they've locked down their populations, and they've prepared their healthcare service. The fact that the UK government has taken this completely different approach means that if things go wrong, every time someone gets ill, every time someone dies, they're going to blame the government for their misstep.
Yeah.
And that is leading to a lot of social unrest and a lot of anger, which I think didn't need to happen. If, as I say, if the government does have this secret study that proves them completely right, that's fantastic. But in not sharing it, they've sowed this element of doubt in the public, which I think will see a ripple effect into society. And you can look on social media, and I know social media is dominated by the young and the left, but there's a huge amount of anger out there. So I think that approach has been wrong. I also think the piecemeal approach in which they've been dealing with the non-virus problems has been slow and wrong and not comprehensive. So they'll say one day that people shouldn't go to pubs, but then the publicans throw their arms up and say, well, hold on, how are we going to pay the rent? And then they say, well, no one will be evicted from their premises. And then the landlords say, well, hold on, how are we going to buy our food? Yeah. And then they say, well, no, have to pay the mortgage, and the mortgage brokers say, well, hold on, we're going to go bankrupt. Yeah. So there needs to be a holistic, comprehensive strategy that makes clear where everyone stands. And what the Bow Group has suggested is that they adopt essentially a universal rollout of universal credit. So the presumption is for everyone that applies for universal credit, they're entitled to it. This can be reviewed after the fact when this crisis is over, and if people have been inappropriately applying for universal credit, then that can be dealt with after the fact. But I think right now people need money to subsist. They need money to buy food. Yeah. They need money to pay the bills. They need money to buy essentials. And if there's loads of people for whom the provisions that the government put in place with sick pay and stuff don't apply, self-employed, sole traders, the low earners, a whole tranche of society is not taken into account with what the government has been saying. So I think there needs to be a universal approach so everyone is taken care of and everyone knows where they stand.
Yes.
And hopefully that will remove some uncertainty, not only from the minds of the public, but also from the markets.
Yes. Well, you say about the self-employed. I know of households where both parents are self-employed, and they're quite worried at the moment and don't understand how it is they're going to get through the next few months, where they're going to get the money from. So I think you're right.
Yeah, well, I mean, it so happens that I'm self-employed. I know a lot of people that are self-employed. There are an awful lot of small business owners. There, as I say, there are the sole traders, there are the small business owners, and it's all very well for the government, even for big companies, to say, "Oh, you can't lay anyone off." But these big companies have therefore got all of the wage costs to deal with, and they haven't got any income coming in many cases.
Yes.
So what they've been doing is just sort of moving around the chairs on the decks of the Titanic, and they create a problem where they solve a problem. So I think this needs to be thought about very carefully, and a national strategy needs to be put forward. I mean, it was very clear to us in the Bow Group that this was going to be a major crisis in January, and we called on the government to act then. They didn't. They said that they didn't see that this posed a threat to the British public. When the budget was released, it was absolutely apparent that this was going to be a major threat to the British public, and yet they were sitting there talking about HS2 and infrastructure. I mean, the government needs to be solely focused on dealing with this crisis, not on major infrastructure projects that are going to go on for the next 20 years. And the budget should have been entirely focused on this, and it should have given a comprehensive vision of how the whole country is going to function going forward. It didn't do that, and what Rishi Sunak said 2 days ago didn't do that. So they're having to revise their position every day it seems. So I think the next time they come to the table, and I understand there are going to be several announcements today about who are key workers, and
Yes.
Boris said in Hughes yesterday that to Corbyn, don't worry, we're going to sort out the self-employed, we're going to sort everything out. So he said.
Yes.
But as you say, people need to know what that plan is.
Yes.
Almost immediately, in the next 48 hours.
Yes, and as you point out earlier, every hour does count at this stage, and makes a big difference. So the sooner such information can come out, the more easily people can move on.
You will have people who are working today because they can't afford not to work, and they'll be out there spreading and catching coronavirus, because as far as they're concerned, the government haven't told them how they're going to get by and how they're going to pay for food over the next however long it is, 3 months. So they're saying, well, I'm still being a plasterer because that's how I feed my family.
Yes, exactly.
So it's not only an economic problem, it's also a cause of the spreading of the virus. And obviously when Boris said, well, I advise people not to go to pubs, because he didn't say we're closing all the pubs, people still went to pubs because there's nothing stopping them going to pubs. And the landlords couldn't close their doors because they need to continue to trade in order to earn their livelihood.
Exactly.
So it's the economic misstep is leading to a healthcare misstep as well, and the two are going to become increasingly interwoven as time goes on. And I think it is absolutely right. Several people have come out and said this is as much an economic crisis as it is a healthcare crisis.
Yes.
Or a public health crisis. And that is absolutely true. But one feeds the other, and you've got to deal with both at the same time.
I was talking to the landlord of a local social club at my university the other day, because I run events which take place at the social club, but I had to call him and say we're having to cancel as everybody was going home before the end of term, as lectures were called off and people didn't want to gather together. And he was saying a similar thing to what you just said then, which was that whilst people have been advised not to go to the pubs and the social clubs, because they're still open, they're having to still make the orders, keep the doors open, but he didn't know how much to order because he was quite certain that not many people were going to turn up, so money was likely to be wasted on buying alcohol and food which was going to go to waste. It's led to quite a lot of stress, I think, and economic errors on the face of pubs who haven't been given quite enough support in this case, I think.
Yeah, and the answer to all of these questions has to be leadership, and it has to come from the top. I'm not a statist. I'm not someone that wants to see the government overreach. But in this situation, it is perhaps the greatest crisis that this country has ever faced in terms of the number of people affected and the domestic risk to life. And we've got the government we've got. We can complain about the things that they're doing and we can advise them to change tack, but they're going to be the government that deals with this. And so it's only Boris Johnson that can get his hands around this and quickly give the nation the clarity and the action that it needs, because up until now the government has actually been quite light on action. They've been very heavy on advice: wash your hands, self-isolate, don't go to pubs, but they haven't actually done anything to prevent people going from pubs to pubs. They haven't done anything to prevent people being in close proximity to each other, and therefore all they've really done is given advice. And I think the scale of this crisis is such that it needs probably quite draconian action by the government to get it under control.
What do you think of the emergency coronavirus bill? I talked to you about this last night briefly, actually. So a bill is being introduced to Parliament with emergency action, such as giving the police powers to detain those who may be infected with the virus, and also allowing for those who usually work with the care of people with mental illnesses requiring only one doctor to say if they should be detained rather than two. Such measures as this, which is going to pass through Parliament in the next couple of days, I believe, without any debate or vote. Do you think that that's an appropriate measure as well, or that even in times like this there should be the same amount of scrutiny in Parliament?
Well, the government already has the Emergency Powers Act, which, in the event of a national crisis like this, gives them a very comprehensive set of powers. The specific bill in relation to coronavirus, I've not seen anything in it that I believe adds to the powers that the government already have. However, I do think that it is a good thing that they're signalling this stuff in Parliament. I think scrutiny would be good, although the form that takes is problematic, because obviously the chamber of the House of Commons is a health hazard in itself.
Indeed,
but
yes.
I don't think it would be too difficult to set up a remote system. And that's certainly something that I think will need to be looked at, because this won't be the only issue that requires parliamentary scrutiny.
No, of course.
I think there also might be some sense in widening the government to include other parties, because of the scale of this crisis. And, I'm really not an advocate of the Labour Party or of the Liberal Democrats or of the SNP.
No.
However, this has to be something that carries the whole country with it.
It's not a partisan issue.
It's not a partisan issue. And I think there needs to be collective responsibility. And yes, there absolutely needs to be scrutiny. More than ever, there needs to be scrutiny. And there needs to be consultation, and there needs to be all those things. But I think the scale of crisis is so great that you probably need to form a crisis government, so that those people who are very strong Jeremy Corbyn supporters who think Boris is the devil, are taken on board, and there can be a sort of one voice from the country, if you like, of this is what we need to do. And I certainly think that figures like Nigel Farage should be involved, and Nicola Sturgeon. So I think it has to be countrywide. It has to be completely cross-party, and it has to take everyone with it. That doesn't mean zero scrutiny.
No.
It hopefully means more scrutiny. But ultimately, unfortunately, due to the scale of the crisis, there is going to have to be a lot that falls into the hands of the executive, and there is going to have to be a lot of very quick decision making that goes on by Boris and the very senior members of the government. And yes, in peacetime, in ordinary times, that's not something I would like to see. Unfortunately, I think it is necessary, and there are going to be a lot of measures that will need to be brought forward that are necessary, that I think would be completely abhorrent under normal practice. But I don't think there is any other way to gain control of the situation.
Quite, and one of the rumours going around at the moment is a shutdown, a complete lockdown of London, for example. I've been hearing about, and other areas as well, preventing people from going out much at all, really, as has been seen in other countries. Is this the sort of approach that you think would be suitable at this sort of time, then?
Well, I think the whole country needs to be put into lockdown. I think the problem with the way it's happening is the press is breaking this stuff before the government. I mean, this is something that I heard about several days ago when I became aware that the armed forces were being mobilised. Now, inevitably, the armed forces is such a large organisation that information is going to get out. I think the way it's happening is the public are becoming aware of the rumours, and then the government suddenly springing this stuff on them. And I don't think that's right. And as we said yesterday, I think that people should try and get out of the cities. Obviously, on a national scale, we don't want people spreading the diseases, but we also want people to be safe and to be with their loved ones if they can be, and to have the things that they will need to last them several days. So I think information is key, and being transparent is key in the kind of country we are, so as not to build up resentment. But ultimately, I do think it is the absolute right strategy for everyone to go home or go to wherever they are, wherever they feel most comfortable, and remain there for as long as possible. We asked the government last week to sequester public spaces, hotels, these sorts of things for the homeless and those in vulnerable housing.
Yes.
Those that don't have anywhere else to go. There will be a sizable proportion of people, especially in London. And that's something that I think is quite urgent, because homeless people particularly are at great risk of getting this and not being in good health to deal with the strain that the virus puts on the body. So I think everyone needs to be off the streets, self-isolating or isolating with their families, their loved ones, and that needs to be in a safe environment. So that's what I think will be essential to stop the spread of this virus.
And the important point, sorry, carry on.
And aside to that is there needs to be a lot more testing of. There needs to be a lot more tests rolled out, and the availability of those tests needs to be rolled out. Boris is talking about churning out 25,000 tests a day. That's a good start, but I think it needs to go far higher than that, because there's a lot of people who are saying, well, I want to go home to my parents, or I want to go home to my wife, but I think I might have coronavirus. Of course, if they do have it, they need to completely self-isolate. But if they don't have it, then I think you and people have been talking about this, you've also got to think about people's mental health. If they don't get out of the lockdown, and an individual is trapped in London for 3 months away from their family, that's going to be a very difficult situation for the mental health of them and their families. So we need to find out very quickly who has coronavirus and who doesn't. And the people that don't, I think, need to be given passage to go home and be with their families.
Yes, absolutely. And the important point that you stress as well is the openness of the approach, because hearing rumours on social media and then the government announcing it 2 moments before it's set forth is not going to be very good in terms of people feeling as though the right approach is being taken. So you're quite right that openness is key as well.
Yes, and Boris is not particularly good at that, but what he is very good at, I think, is speaking and addressing people in a fairly direct way. I think generally, and it's a matter of personal taste, but Boris comes off as quite unscripted, and in that sense frank. And I think that is actually the tone that is required. I don't think people want to see someone reading a printed statement.
No.
So Boris has a lot of skills in his favour in that regard, but I think his natural tendency is to politique and to try and obfuscate. But I think he needs to be completely open with the public, or as open as it is possible to be.
Yes.
To remove that dissent that has built up in the space of just a week. And as I said before, one way to do that is to widen this and to bring in other parties, so people don't feel that this is a conservative approach. I don't think that is the approach that the government is taking. I don't think you can put a political ideology on it. But by having those other faces involved that we as Conservatives might not find particularly appealing, there are a lot of people in the country that will be given confidence by that.
Absolutely. And I think an important point which I'd like to ask as well is, especially with the people you've mentioned you've been in contact with over this and the information you've been getting, how long do you think the virus itself, but also importantly the lockdowns, could last for?
Well, I am not an epidemiologist.
Yeah.
And even those that are epidemiologists do not know. They only base their projections on the information we have and the several months that we've had where we've seen this virus develop. There is a lot of truth to what is being said about the double peak. It's very likely that as a result of national isolation and quarantine, the virus will peak and start to drop in a similar way that we've seen it in China and South Korea and some other countries. What I think the government should be doing and should have been doing is slowing it down as much as possible, to buy time to get in ventilators, to increase hospital capacity, and to buy any time we've got before a vaccine is produced, which some people say might be years, but it might be months. We don't know. So the more weeks you buy, the fewer people die. So there will be a peak. I think that peak will occur from the information I have seen. I think that peak will occur in 4 to 6 weeks from now. I think the virus will then start to decline in terms of the rate that it's spreading. And what we can see in China at the moment, because they've taken very draconian measures to quarantine Wuhan.
Yes.
They're now reporting no new cases. Now, you can debate whether the Chinese are giving accurate figures or not, but I think there is evidence across a number of countries that isolation, lockdown and quarantine slows this virus down a lot and actually gets it into decline. The problem is that if you don't have a vaccine or a cure for the virus at that time, yes, the virus will go into decline in terms of its rate of spread. But when everyone gets out of quarantine, it will start to rise again. It probably won't rise as quickly because most information suggests that the virus doesn't like heat.
Right.
So summer should see a lull, but you'll then get another peak picking up in winter. Now, the government's herd immunity strategy was based on the idea that if we get immune to it now, when winter comes, we'll be ready for it. But of course, from what I can see, that's not based on any accurate science, because there's no evidence that people do develop immunity to the virus, and therefore can't catch it a second time, or the second time's not as bad as the first time.
Right.
So I think this year you're looking at 2 peaks, one occurring quite soon in the next month or so, and the other occurring in winter. At the moment, the NHS has approximately 5,000 ventilators. Boris said they've now got 8,000, but I haven't seen any evidence that they have 8,000. 800 of those ventilators are free. So, most of the ventilators are taken because it's not just coronavirus that requires ventilation. There's all sorts of and all those conditions will still continue to be as prevalent as they ever were. So we've got a fraction of the amount of ventilators we need. There are about 150,000 hospital beds, but worst case predictions show that 8 to 10 million people will require hospitalisation in probably the next 3 months.
Crikey, yes.
therefore the NHS will be completely overwhelmed in a very, very short space of time. I have a serious medical condition, so I've been trying to get on to the NHS to work out what I should do for the best. You can't get through to 111 at the moment. You'll wait for an hour and a half, and then the line will just cut off. So the NHS is already overwhelmed, and we haven't got anywhere near the peak of this yet. If you look at what's happening in Italy, they're saying things like the over 80s are not coming to hospital anymore. That's it.
Yeah.
I think as things get worse in Italy, it will just become a situation where it's first come, first served. Everyone else, you've just got to fend for yourself. And the economist Andrew Lillico has been, I encourage people to look at his Twitter. He's been running the numbers on this, and he has concluded that this crisis is going to involve most people that get the virus and most people that get severe pneumonia as a result of the virus, seeing that out at home, hopefully with the care of their loved ones.
Yes.
And therefore becomes a question of what can we do as citizens to best prepare ourselves for that situation and best prepare ourselves to care for loved ones. Is there any treatments, drugs, holistic or otherwise, we can get in now to prepare for that reality, a reality where people really need to be in hospital but just can't be in hospital because there's nowhere near enough spaces.
Yes.
So it's going to be a very, very difficult situation for a lot of people, and I don't think we've ever seen anything like it in this country. And it's really going to be very difficult for individuals and very difficult for the country as a whole, because we're going to have to face death in a way that we haven't ever faced it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think that's a good place to end on the discussion. Not a particularly happy note, of course, but you raised some important questions of the approach the government should be taking, of the open nature that this should be showing itself into, and also the scale of the problem we are facing. So I'm really grateful for you giving your time with us for that.
I would like to make just one final point.
Please do, yeah.
Which is that it's as I've said, and very clear, I think the government has made some major mistakes. But we've also got to look to ourselves as citizens and ask what we can do to help. There is talk of we called for the setting up of a national volunteer service, and I think Lord Dannatt is heading something up of that nature. And so I think there will be a situation where a lot of particularly younger people who perhaps aren't as badly affected by the virus as the old can perhaps volunteer to do things like deliver food parcels to leave on the doorsteps of elderly people.
Yes.
These sorts of things. We're going to need a real national collective effort, rather than just saying, "Oh, the government, why aren't they doing more?" We're going to have to all do more. Yes. And all pitch in for that. And I think one of the problems we're going to see this year, and we've already started to see it in supermarkets, but that's largely because of the panic buying that's been going on.
Yeah.
But I think that we're going to have problems with food. We import most of our food in this country, and I think other countries are going to stop exporting anything, really.
Yeah.
So we are, when people talk about returning to the wartime spirit, I think we really are going to have to return to the wartime spirit of things like digging for victory and digging up the garden and putting a few spuds in and that sort of thing, and taking care of communities within communities. And taking care of people who don't have enough food or don't have enough medical supplies. It's going to be a real test of the nation's character, which I'm very confident that Britain will meet with flying colours. But we should be under no illusions that we're all going to have to pitch in.
Absolutely, quite right. And let's hope that we all do. I'm very grateful for Ben for joining us again at Bournebrook in our In Conversation With series, and thank you all for listening to us again. I hope you join us when we have our next episode up and that you all stay safe. Cheers.